So I figured I wanted to ask you guys a question like in your career, more like career advice type of thing. What's the best piece of advice that you ever received from somebody for your career?
Well, my mom told me this statement a long time ago when I first started working. And that statement was, um, it's easy to find a job, but it's difficult to keep it. And she elaborated on that in the sense that if you really look, you can find work just about anywhere, doing just about anything. It does not necessarily mean that it's going to be the ideal job, the perfect job, it's going to pay you the most, but you'll find work. And she then went on to say that the key component is once you have that job, you have to pretty much own that job in order to be successful, in order to keep that job, in order to keep working. Because if you don't do that, chances are you're going to end up in a point where somebody else is going to come along and either do the job better, or the current employer is going to look at you and go, you're making too many mistakes, or, I've got to go back over everything that you've done just to make sure that you've done it right. And it comes to the point where if I got to do that, if I have to do your job, then I don't need you here to do it. So that was one thing my mother told me a long time ago. It's kind of stuck true with just about everything I've ever done. So.
I was just talking to my class because we were talking about customer service issues, and one of the things that the book had mentioned and I elaborated on was they said own the problem. So whatever the problem is that somebody comes to you with, you own it and then make sure you take care of it. Whatever you have to do, you don't just give up on it and say, "Oh, I don't know what to do," and then just not contact the customer back or escalate it to the next level if necessary. But the idea was you own the problem. Whatever the problem is, figure it out. And if you can't do it, you pass it on to somebody else. You got to figure out how to escalate it. And so a lot of that is, you have to figure shit out or whatever it takes, right?
Right.
Not give in and just sit there. I'd have to say that one of the things that I learned, it wasn't really career advice, but I learned it and I've applied it to my career a lot. And that is when I was in the Marine Corps, one of the biggest things they always talked about was train excessively. They're like, you should always be training. And I think, especially in any career related to IT or any other fast-paced, fast-changing career, it's important to stay ahead of the game. Otherwise, you fall behind so fast. I've had a number of students in classes of mine who've coming back and they say, I've been doing this for like 10 years and I just, doing the same thing. They start upgrading everything and now I found out that my skills don't work with it anymore. I need to go back to school and learn new skills. And I think that's where you're starting to see like edX and Udemy and lynda.com and those types of training platforms starting to come up to foster to continuing education. I think in part, and I work for academics, but I think in part because academics aren't answering the call, the need that students have or people have for education right now. Because it's very much focused on, we want to get you a degree, and it's not really focused in, they talk about, stackable credentials and all this other stuff, but they haven't implemented anything yet. And it takes forever for academics to implement anything. So
I think that's a key point about the academic side, is that it takes so long for it to go through so many committees to get approved that by the time you get it approved to actually start teaching it, it's already maybe a year and a half, 2 years from when that should have been implemented, because, like you said, the technology and everything else related to it has already changed and gone by. Whereas sites like, Lynda and Udemy and all of those, they're very agile and, oh, this is the latest trend that is just coming out. Well, here's something that will teach you how to use it or how to better understand it or how to better implement it in your environment. Whereas if you go to the academic side, and yes, I work for a university as well, and the same thing, it's very long process for them to get up to speed. Like, here's a good example. they had a committee formed 6 years ago for the establishment of creating a master's in cybersecurity. They just now enrolled their first, and I'm going to use quotes here, their first beta students into the program this year. The problem they have now is the computer science department is not involved in the cybersecurity. It's run by 3 different schools: the law school, the business school, and informatics. Those are the 3 key schools that are behind the cybersecurity master's degree.
I wonder why computer science wasn't behind it more.
I have no idea, but and again, that they formed a committee and they went through this whole path, and this is what they came up with. And it's taken them almost 6 years to get it to the point where they now have a handful of students actually going through that process. Going through the class now.
You know what's interesting about that? Because
the only funnier than that would have been if the university was passed.
Oh, Bryan was trying to say something, but he was cutting out really bad. One of the things that I found, and maybe Bryan will be able to get back on, but one of the things that I found out with silos within organizations, especially in academia, you end up with computer science being on one side and then computer information systems and computer networking technology on another side. And all the practical day-to-day stuff, systems administration, network administration, information workers, and all that fall under either business or they fall under technical education, career technical education. And then computer science is strictly engineering the hardware, like the engineering side of things, how to develop circuit boards and whatnot, or in software development. And I think that dichotomy, unfortunately, doesn't do students a whole lot of good because you're separating too many things out. Security should, cover all of those different areas. And so where security, the need first arose is under networking. And so that's kind of where, in most colleges, that's where you end up seeing where cybersecurity programs are. But if you're not teaching cybersecurity as a part of programming, you're missing out on things. Even on the hardware side of things, you have a bunch of people out there with computer science degrees developing Internet of Things items, and they're not necessarily focused on cybersecurity. And this gets back to my point. To kind of make a circle out of it, and that is that continuing education throughout your life cycle is really important, your career life cycle. And I think a lot of people don't talk about career life cycles that way, and I just recently started talking about that way because we talk about life cycles in technology all the time. We never really think about career life cycles, and what do I need to do on the maintenance side of my career to make sure that, I am still going to be viable as a candidate if I needed to get another job.
I agree, and I think you're seeing some of this now with some of the certifications that you can earn in the industry, that they are now positioning that in order to keep and maintain that certification, you have to earn continuing education credits, or whatever the moniker is for the particular vendor. But you can let them lapse, but you're going to have to recertify at some point if you want to maintain your viability in the industry, I guess. Or you can do the maintenance on a yearly task that shows that you're continuing to learn something new within that particular track. Like most of the security certifications that are out there, they all contain and have components that require you to maintain continuing education credits of some kind, just to show that you're keeping up with the trends of the industry. And cybersecurity as a whole is one of these that, there's so many things that change so many times. Like, I just got a posting today, a tweet, as a matter of fact, about Bad Rabbit. Heard about Bad Rabbit?
Not yet.
So Bad Rabbit is a ransomware type of a attack vector, but they called it Bad Rabbit. It's actually called ransom win32 tibar.a,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Windows Defender now, the latest update, detects it. But what was really interesting is that, like I said, this is something that has just been released. Let's see, when is this released? 3:44 this afternoon, East Coast time. So about 4 hours ago.
Fresh off the presses.
Yes, fresh off the presses. And so I went to go actually read up on it as the starting point. And yes, it goes through, but it's what they're doing now is Bad Rabbit is buried within multiple compromised iframes within a web page is where they're putting in components of Bad Rabbit. So when you go to a page, the initial page that gets rendered may be fine, but it's buried deep within it that excuse me, that is where it picks up the information to actually pull it down. It's very similar in function to the AdSense base. Do you know that one?
Oh, yeah.
Right, that one is buried within multiple iframes to get you the coin miner process, right? But again, like I said, these are things that just came right off the press today. And if you're not keeping up with, following at least some sort of technology blog or news site or something like that, it's going to be difficult to maintain your viability at your current position, or even if you want to move up. You're going to get to a point where, you're going to hit from, and I put it into two distinct categories, right? There's the doers of IT, and then there's the management side, right? So you're going to get to a certain level within the doers of IT, and those would be like, senior network admins, your engineers, your architects, those kind of things. You're going to get to a point where you're not going to, either you yourself don't want to do it anymore because you're just getting burned out because you've been doing it for so long, or you want to switch over to the management side and actually manage the department behind it. So your skill sets are going to change drastically when you move from being the doer to being the manager. I mean, that's just my take on it, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, what you have to learn on a day-to-day basis is going to change as your career changes, right? I mean, because part of it is, somewhere along the line in my career, I had to learn how to do budgets. You know what I mean? Because they come back to me and they'd say, okay, what do you want to do for the next quarter or next year? What kind of technologies and what do you want to implement? And by the way, this is what your budget is. So submit back to us, what you plan to, how you're going to prioritize. And, and that's something that luckily somewhere along the lines I had some rudimentary training with it, and I was able to go back and then review my textbooks because I still had them, so I could figure out how to actually write like a coherent budget. And luckily I work at accounting firm, Mays and Associates, so I just grabbed one of the accountants and said, hey, how's this look? And they said, well, we don't really do it like that anymore. Do it like this. I'm like, okay, good. So, I mean, yeah, what you have to learn changes throughout your career, and I think that that's one of the most important things that you have to be considered about.
Yep.
In this technology, in this industry, or I should say, in this day and age, it is never truer today. It has never been truer than today that change is not just constant. It's not just expected, it's required, right? The technology is changing so rapid, especially with the advent of cloud technology and crowd mind. And, if we went back 20 years ago in the early 90s where I had first joined technical support from Microsoft and just trying to keep up with the changes that were occurring and the problems that were occurring, what we would do is we would read KB articles, knowledge base articles. A couple, for those of us who are interested to keep up, we would read a couple of these 2, 3, 4 articles a day just to, hey, that's a new bug, or nobody knew how to fix this and this got addressed. And then that would help you find and defeat issues as they were coming up. As time progressed and I had moved on from that as a career, 20 years ago into software development, right? Back then, again, 20 years ago, development was very, very different than what it is today. And you could be focused on a particular area, but to keep up and the ever evolving and changing, you had to, you go out and read several books and read different articles, Stack Overflow or whatever the soup du jour were. And that constant learning and that constant change, that was the constant. The change was the constant over the career that was changing and evolving. So the one constant was continual learning, continuing education, interest, need, desire, where jobs for me went from technical support into software development and then into industry specific areas such as content management or CRM or SQL Server or data management, data sciences, wherever that led you. That was the evolving part of the career, but that constant theme throughout it was continual education. And to both your gentlemen's points earlier in the call tonight, where you mentioned between artificial intelligence taking over and changing or removing and getting rid of jobs, while that I would agree with that, for every time that there's an industrial revolution or a shift in jobs or a shift in demand, there is still a need for that human capital, that human change, and that human intelligence that goes along the entire process. So whether that's the folks that are maintaining the robots or the folks that are creating the new AI or the folks that are designing things we can't even think about today, the level of detail and the level of knowledge dramatically increases. The need of that knowledge dramatically increases, which is going to create a divide amongst our society. There are going to be those that simply don't, won't, or can't, and there are going to be those that do and make that happen. And that's just my opinion.
Well, that's a interesting. That's a whole other topic that we can bring up in another conversation. My mind's racing with all kinds of questions about that. But so, Bryan, let's ask you: did you ever get a piece of career advice that was really especially useful for you that you found useful?
No. I've solicited. No, I have solicited none that I can. We'll be honest. I honestly don't recall anything that was truly, wisdom, nuggets of wisdom in career advice, where in the industry that I grew up in and the people that I was surrounded with, they either didn't get it or were so fearful that they were risk adverse, and so anything that was a big blue chip company was what I was recommended to go work for or with or become part of a career that was going to span 20 years or 30 years or 40 years in a single company. And I disagreed with everything that I had been told. And throughout my career, I have learned that, quite honestly, expect and quite honestly, not just expect, but perhaps this is the right thinking, is that 2 to 5 years at a company is more than enough. And shifting from one place to another doesn't just while it doesn't provide that. What was it that years ago companies would always want to see you have a 10-year span?
Right.
I forget what was it called. Not somebody who was jumping around. And I can't remember that, but the point is in our industry, in the technology industry, if you don't hit the refresh and restart button, you become stale. Sometimes simply changing a job within a company or changing a role is great, and other times it's great to get a completely different perspective and learn a very new way of doing the same thing or even a different thing. And that is as important as that career longevity, because I can't tell you how many companies I've been through, not as a career, but as a consultant, learning and experiencing the different ways that the same things are done, where some have failed and some have flourished. And that's as important to get that. And you're not going to get that if you were to work for IBM for 25 years, or if you're going to work for Microsoft for 35 years. You're going to find the IBM way of doing things and the Microsoft way of doing things, and you're really going to miss out. And that goes for the technology, because the technology is so widespread and deep all at the same time. You're going to miss a major component, and I don't think that advice that was given even 5 or 10 years ago can still hold true today.
Well, that's a good point that you brought up, though, because I was asking for a piece of good advice, and you gave me a piece of bad advice, and that's a good thing too, because now it makes me wonder, like, have I been given bad advice? And I'm thinking back, and I'm thinking, yes, I've been given a lot of bad advice.
It could just be I'm too block-headed to have heard the good advice or to take it. That's very, very, and Robert, I'm sure you're shaking your head and smiling. Yes. I can see it here. But there's plenty. There is no golden road. There's luck. There's intelligence. There's hard work. There's all of these things. But the thing that doesn't work is being stagnant and simply, this is my job, this is how it's always been. That absolutely does not work.
So I think what you're saying in the bigger picture is the piece of advice that you kind of share, or that you followed without actually anyone in particular giving it to you, has always been continually learning, be a lifelong learner. No matter what field you are in. But if you are a lifelong learner, then you will have longevity in the field that you are in. Not necessarily the specific job, but the field. So if you're in IT and you're a lifelong learner, you will have longevity in the IT field.
Yep, I could stand behind that for sure. And from a career advice perspective, I'm going to give out some wisdoms, some nuggets of wisdom, and that is, especially for those that are in college or just coming out of school, going into their first, second, or even third job. It's okay. Don't worry about the career. You're there to get the experience. You're there to get the knowledge. You're there to figure out who you are and what you can truly impart. And there's so much that can be done from that point forward. Don't be afraid to take new risks and new jobs. And it's okay that you go to a job and it doesn't work out. It's okay, because there's other jobs. And when there is a career or what was that? I'm a little brain dead tonight. If there's a pause in the job market where certain jobs aren't there, then that's when you go to create the jobs. That's your job becomes an entrepreneur and to hire and to sell the idea to make it work. So right now, the soup du jour, the name, the title that's going to be making the money right now, or in the next 2 to 3 years, is going to be data scientist, right? That's the buzzword. That's where AI is. That's where big data is. That's where machine learning is. It's all about the data. It's all about data scientists. Along that parallel path is the incredible growth of the people who say no, and that's cybersecurity. And that's just as important, and it's just as much of a buzzword. So if you're good at saying no, don't do that. Cybersecurity is the way to go.
No, that's not fair. You're picking on us.
I am, just a little bit, because, well, there's more of you than me.
Well, I don't know about that.
And you still get hacked every day.
I know. Hey, you know what? We have to get it right 100% of the time. The bad guys only have to get it right once.
Exactly. I mean, those aren't great odds, but it works.
Minutes or so.
That works for the house, right? The house always wins.
Yes, that's true. Well, Jen, I want to thank you guys for the call. I'm going to have to cut it off because I have class to go to, and I got to eat before I go there. So hope to see you guys next week. I'm hoping that John is going to do his presentation. I forget what it was on, but it sounded really interesting. So
excellent. And then remind me if I forget. I just sat Red Shirt Dev Day in Boston with Scott Guthrie. And
what is Red Shirt Day?
Well, we'll talk about that next time. But the AI sample that he put up, that was just with a couple, I'd say a couple lines of code. It was probably 20 or 30 lines of code. Was fantastic, and I'd love to talk about that.
Oh, well,
Oh, that sounds interesting.
You say red shirt, and I'm thinking Star Trek, and that's the person that dies. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. And
Thank you.
Our special guest in my office would like to say hi as well. Her name is Christine.
Hello, Christine.
We're saying hi back.